Hi, this is Happy Traum from Homespun Tapes, and you're listening to Bluegrass Jam Along, the podcast for anyone and everyone who plays bluegrass.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the podcast. This week I've got a really cool guest for you. This is, I think it's probably not an exaggeration to say that there aren't many people who've done more to encourage and support people into playing instruments in all sorts of genres, but particularly in the bluegrass and acoustic world, and that is Happy Traum from Homespun. Lots of us will have seen Happy's videos, used Happy's audio courses, and know of Homespun already. But I just wanted to chat to Happy and hear a bit about how the company started, and the people they've worked with, and just celebrate some of the, this is a company that's been around for 55 years and has helped thousands and thousands of people like me and hopefully like you. So here comes the interview. Stick around and check out the bit right at the end, because Happy has given all of us a discount code we can use to get some money off, and I will be listing a few of the lessons that I love most and the stuff that I bought from Homespun, and we'll chat about some of Happy's favourites. But there's a discount at the end, so stick around and get your discount code, because you've got a few weeks to grab some bargains. But here comes the interview. My guest this week on Bluegrass Jam Along is Happy Traum. Happy is a great guitar player, great musician, great teacher, but most of us probably know Happy through Homespun. Happy has been in so many of our homes with some of the world's best musicians, teaching us to play, inspiring us, and it's a joy to have him here. Happy, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Nice to be here with you.
I think I'd like to start just by saying thank you on behalf of me and behalf of the hundreds of thousands of people you've helped over the years. I think for musicians like me, like the inspiration might come from Tony Rice or Doc Watson or Bill Monroe or somebody, but the support and just the people you've encouraged and enabled and allowed to grow as musicians over the year are like countless, and it's just been a joyous thing, and I thank you very much.
Oh, yeah, thank you. It's a nice tribute. We have been doing this a very long time, and when we started out, we had no idea that it would build to what it's become 50-something years later. It's almost 55 years now.
Incredible. And it, by the sound of it, it started out as a sort of problem-solving thing for you to be able to teach people while you were away. Yeah,
pretty much. I had written a couple of books about guitar styles, mostly one called Fingerpicking Styles for Guitar. And that was a pretty popular book. It was the first of its kind, because I took it upon myself to transcribe the music of people like Doc Watson, Etta Baker, Elizabeth Cotton, traditional Merle Travis, traditional fingerpickers. And I painstakingly took solos that they did and the songs that they did and put them in this book. And it was the first time anybody had ever done anything like that. So people started to write to me who had the book and said, I don't know how these songs are going to go, and I live out somewhere in the Midwest or maybe in Britain or someplace, and they couldn't find these records at that point. You couldn't just dial up Spotify or something like that. So I figured, well, maybe I should just make some lessons on tape, and based on my first book, on the Fingerpicking Styles book. So as best I could, I tried to show how these, a lot of it is based on an alternating thumb rhythm and syncopated treble notes. Merle Travis kind of was one of the people who invented that style, but Mississippi John Hurt and Elizabeth Cotton, all those people continued it on until the folk revivalists of my day were also playing that. So I also included Dave Van Ronk and Mike Seeger and people like that. So, I did my best to replicate that they were audio reel-to-reel tapes, actually. Nowadays, people don't even know what a tape is.
Yeah.
But they were literally reel-to-reel tapes that we copied from one to the other. we'd have what used to be called master tapes. I think it's not politically correct to call them that anymore, but it would be the main tape, and then we would run it off on our kitchen table and copy it, and then my wife Jane would pack it up and take it to the post office and send it out to people. And we put a few little ads in places like Sing Out magazine, and Rolling Stone was just starting the same year we were.
Wow.
And so was Guitar Player magazine. Both of those started in 1967. That's the same year we started Homespun. So we started taking little classified ads, and strangely, people started saying, yeah, I want these. And so when we got a good response, we said, well, we got lots of friends here in Woodstock and people that I play music with. Maybe I'll get them to do some tapes too. And that's what kind of started the whole thing.
So who were the first people that you got involved then?
Well, I think my brother Artie, who was had just moved from New York City to Woodstock at that point, did some lessons for me. We had Kenny Kosek, who's to this day a great bluegrass fiddle player, who was based in New York, and he did a basic fiddle lesson series for us. David Bennett Cohen, who had just finished playing with Country Joe and the Fish, is piano, kind of a blues ragtime piano player. He came, we had a little upright piano in our house, and he came in and I set up some mics, and he did a couple of series of lessons on blues and ragtime piano. And that just got us started. And another one was Bill Keith, great banjo player who moved to Woodstock right around that time. So I corralled Bill and got him into my living room. All these were recorded literally in my living room with simple, like a Wallensack reel-to-reel recorder and a couple of funky microphones. I mean, I never expected it to be anything very, long-lasting. What did I know back then?
And I guess the name Homespun came from all that then. Literally recorded at home, duplicated at home.
Exactly. Jane came up with it, and she said, well, we're spinning these tapes on the table here. Let's just call it Homespun. So it was her brainchild. And my wife has been a part of the business. Actually, probably the bigger part of the business. I do the music stuff, and she keeps it all together. So she's the reason it still exists, really.
And that must have been quite an undertaking, sort of posting like reel-to-reel tapes out to people, and just the cost of the tape and the cost of sort of shipping it around the world to people. Yeah,
it was. In fact, the most challenging part was putting tablature together. And how do you? At that point, it wasn't so easy to go to a quick copy place and just copy it. So, actually, the publisher who published my books had a Xerox machine. And I used to take this is a funny kind of thing, I think. I used to take my handwritten tablatures, go down to his office, which was in New York, Midtown Manhattan. And I would sneak into his Xerox room and quickly run off 10 copies of each page or 15 copies or whatever it was, wrap them up, take them home, and then that would get wrapped up with the tape in the box that we would send out then to people. So it was pretty funky and homemade and, very crude back in those days.
Yeah. And so what was the sort of first development from that sort of made things simpler? Was it cassettes? Was that the next sort of like audio cassettes?
Was the next thing. Yeah. Cassettes was definitely the next thing that came in maybe a year or two after we started. That was a whole revelation that we had these little compact things that you could. And so what we did then was we got this, maybe 3 or 4 years in, we got a high-speed duplicator, which was a big deal. It was a gigantic piece of equipment, and it did reel-to-reel tape. It took a reel-to-reel master tape, and it copied at high speed to a reel-to-reel copy, and then it would also take 3 cassettes at the same time. Wow. So we could make both reel-to-reel and cassettes. And the other thing is we used to have to do one side of the tape and then turn it over to do the other side. For those of you who are younger than a certain age, wouldn't realize that those tapes came in, it was 2 sides of a tape.
Yeah.
Just like there were 2 sides of an LP. But this high-speed duplicator did both sides at once, so it did the forwards and backwards at the same time, but it worked out. So that put us into a different realm of the business where we could make these things. It wasn't that high speed, but it was probably maybe 3 times normal speed, which to us was a big deal.
Yeah, I think the first homespun product that I encountered was, I must have been about 17 or something. This is back in the 80s, and like a friend handed me this box of Richard Thompson transcriptions and cassettes, and went, "Listen to this. You can sit at home and learn like these pieces." And Richard Thompson teaches you guitar, and just having my mind blown that like this person whose records I listened to could come and sit in my bedroom with me and teach me how to play.
Yeah,
it's just, it's such an intimate thing.
I think we did Richard a little later. That was probably the early 80s, maybe just before videos came in. I remember I went out to California. I don't remember if I was there anyway, but I met up with him. He was living in LA at the time. So I convinced him. He at that point, he wasn't much of a teacher. Now he's gotten more into teaching because he has this camp that we do every summer. We do it together. I'm part of the thing. And anyway, that's a little diversion. But yeah, so what happened was by the time the 70s came around, I started going further afield and getting more of the bluegrass people involved. People like Dan Crary, who was a natural teacher. Dan is not only a fine guitar player, but a very, very good teacher. And then I met people like Sam Bush, convinced Sam Bush to make mandolin. These were still audios before videos came out. Tony Rice, did a bunch of stuff with Tony Rice. Tony Trishka with Bill Keith. I just started trying to find people who were willing to do it. And the bluegrass, and of course, bluegrass is such a participatory kind of music that people like to share the licks and the stylistic, interesting stuff. And once people like Tony and Sam Bush were on board, it was not hard to get other bluegrass people to say, okay, maybe I'll get on this too. Go ahead.
I was going to say, it's such a sort of an oral tradition anyway, that being able to actually hear it is such a big part of it, isn't it? You can't just learn bluegrass from a book.
Right. Even though I did write a book called Bluegrass Guitar around that time too, but yeah, I agree. You really can't. And the other thing that I discovered about myself was that some of these guys, like Tony, for instance, who was a wonderful guy, but he hadn't taught before. So I got myself into this position of being the interlocutor. I was the kind of the interviewer who tried to draw it out of him and say, wait a minute, what was that lick you just did there? Because, that went by too fast. So can you slow that down for people? That kind of thing. And I ended up, there are some bluegrass and other folk, blues, rock artists that are natural teachers and do it all the time. Somehow Sam Bush was always a natural at just either looking at a camera or going to a microphone and just talking and doing it. Other people like Tony, not so much. So people like Dr. John, who I did originally on audio tapes on piano, New Orleans piano. He was another one. It's so natural for these guys to sit down and play that they don't actually analyze it themselves. So I had to say, stop, people aren't going to know what's your left hand doing, what's your right hand doing, how are you holding that pick, that kind of thing. So yeah, it was a little more challenging on straight audio because I had to really say, okay, now talk about your left hand, now talk about your right hand. When we got into video in the early 80s, then we could do multiple cameras, split screens, and you could see up close what people were doing.
I think that's really interesting. You were sort of talking about whether people are naturally teachers or not. And those the videos you did with Tony Rice, and you did some with Norman Blake as well, where you sort of sit in conversation with them almost, and then you stop them and say what you're doing. Like I find myself going back to those and just watching them with a beer sometimes, because they're just like they're watchable in their, whether you're sitting there with your guitar trying to learn something or not. They're fascinating documents. And there's a couple that you did with Sam Bush doing the same for Bill Monroe, and sort of getting Bill Monroe to talk and bring it out. And they're really interesting sort of documents in their own right.
Yeah, that was one where we were completely. I mean, that was getting Bill Monroe to sit down on a video, and John Hartford interviewed him, and get his band, the Bluegrass Boys, behind him, and all that stuff was a huge thing. I couldn't have done that without Ralph Rinsler and the Smithsonian. Ralph Rinsler was at one time Bill Monroe's manager, and also a musician in his own right. But then Bill Monroe was not much of a teacher, and at this point he was quite an advanced age as well. So after we did that, I got a hold of Sam Bush and I said, can you be the interpreter of Bill Monroe? So we did a separate video with Sam taking what Bill did and breaking it down for the player. I always have in mind what the player who's maybe not that accomplished is going to grasp from these things that we're putting out. And you don't want somebody to just say, oh, that was nice, but I have no idea what they did. Because then, we always had the idea that we were both teaching and documenting. That was always part of our approach.
And I think that is really interesting because, like, if you go back through the catalogue of the hundreds and hundreds of lessons you put out, it although it started as instruction, it sort of exists now as a document of some of these players that aren't with us anymore, and stylistically the way the music's played has probably changed in the past few decades, and the way people talk about it. And it is a sort of archive. I don't want to say archive because that sounds like it's it's all in the past, but it is a sort of living document of how the music's changed and the major people in it, and it's incredibly valuable in its own right for that. Yeah,
and it is. I do have a very strong sense that as time goes on and we lose people, that this is kind of part of their legacy. I mean, they have CDs, they have maybe some videos of performances, but this is something where they're actually talking about their ideas and how they think about their music. And in the last week, we just lost Kelly Jo Phelps. Who was one of my favorites. And he did 2 videos for us. And I just feel, terribly sad that we lost him, but very proud that document exists of him talking about his music.
And I was thinking about today. And as I went through my notes today before we spoke, to realize today, as we record this, would have been Tony Rice's birthday. And that,
I didn't realize that. Okay.
And then having that archive of his, because, and as you say, somebody that not necessarily going to be particularly forthcoming with things like that. And then Norman Blake, the same. Norman Blake, keeps himself to himself by all accounts. And just so to have these records of people talking about how they approach things, because anybody can sit down and tell you where somebody puts their fingers. But to hear how somebody approaches it and what they're thinking when they do it is just such a huge insight.
Right. Yeah, I agree. And I think Tony, for one, really appreciated what we did because, when I first approached him, it was around 70, maybe 1978 or so, 77, 78. As I said before, he he had never really taught anything. And somehow the sessions we did together set us up for a friendship that went right until the time he passed. He was always appreciative, and he did several videos for us. I mean, quite a few. In fact, the very first one he did was one of the first videos we ever did. And it was quite not a grade A experience for him or for us. Not what came out. What came out was great. But we were here, and he came to Woodstock to visit us. This was probably 1983, maybe 84 or something like that. And we booked Todd Rundgren's studio here in Woodstock. But he had never really done any video there. And it turned out it was the winter and there was no heat. So it was freezing in the studio. And there were all kinds of technical glitches. And by the time we got the tape running, poor Tony had been sitting there for hours. And somehow for a guy who was, everybody knows, a very high-strung individual, not only his guitars are high-strung, but but he could not have been more patient and nicer. And what came out of that was some songs that, like his Church Street Blues, which has been bootlegged innumerable times on YouTube and has gotten millions of views. Unfortunately, those millions of people don't think ahead and then buy his video, but at least they are watching it, so that's good.
Yeah, those ones with Tony are some of my favorites. I just find myself going back to those. I've got them, now you can buy the downloads and stream things. I've got those just on my phone, and if I'm ever stuck somewhere for half an hour waiting for something to do, I'll just watch a bit of Tony Rice or a bit of Norman Blake and just, feel a happy half hour. And that sort of that point then where you started doing video, that's sort of a game changer really, to actually be able to see what people are doing. We'll be right back with you just after this. Bluegrass Jam Along is proud to be sponsored by Collings Guitars and Mandolins. If you're attending the NAMM show in January, stop by the Collings booth to say hello to the team, get hands-on with their selection of customised acoustics and electrics, and check out some exciting new prototypes they're working on for 2024. They'll also have a few of their world-class artists on hand demoing various instruments. And if you can't attend, don't forget to follow their Instagram and Facebook accounts throughout the show for photos, videos, and the latest news. Collings guitars are hand-built from the Sound Up in Austin, Texas. This episode is also brought to you by Peghead Nation, the home of roots music instruction. If one of your 2024 resolutions is to improve as a musician, Peghead Nation is the place to go. They have 65 streaming video courses for guitar, mandolin, banjo, fiddle, dobro, bass and ukulele from some of the leading names in acoustic music. Courses cover bluegrass, old-time, Irish music and swing, plus lessons dedicated to improvisation, theory and ear training. Your first course is just $20 a month, and you can add more for $10. Try any course free for a month with the promo code JAMALONG. Make 2024 a year of more music at pegheadnation.com.
As soon as I saw videotapes coming on the scene, I immediately said, we got to do this. When they were first coming out, in fact, we sent out a questionnaire to our mailing list at the time. I had no idea how many people were on it, and it was, of course, a physical questionnaire, like on paper, in envelopes, sending it out to, a few thousand people probably, saying, if we started making videos, would you be interested in buying them? And some huge percentage said, no, we're not interested in, we don't even know what it is. We're not interested. So we said we're doing it anyway. And it was quite a lot of learning on the spot because I knew nothing about video production. I didn't, but I found a good videographer here in Woodstock and other places. Went to Nashville for a lot of our bluegrass stuff was actually shot in Nashville. Learning on the job. So you can almost see the progression from our earliest videos to as I got more proficient, understanding how you call the cameras and get the angles and all that stuff. So I eventually got reasonably good at directing these things.
And then I guess that was sort of it. I mean, that was sort of it for a while. That's when until I did a little bit of research for this, I didn't really realize how long Homespun had been around. You know, for me, it was cassettes and VHS in the 80s and then on through that. Yeah. But, you know, like listening back to what you were saying about the open reel tapes and stuff. And then, like, probably just as you've amassed a huge amount of stuff on VHS, along comes DVD and the world changes again.
Right. And that was another big change for us because we had all this stuff on VHS. And then we said, well, we probably have about 5 years to change over from VHS to DVD. It happened so fast that we had to do everything in a year, within a year. And we had several hundred programs at that point on VHS. So we did this massive effort to digitize everything. And, you know, that was when the Homespun really took off, when DVDs came out, because it was the medium that everybody wanted at that point. So for, I don't know, 10, 15 years, DVDs were the hot thing. Now people don't even have DVD players anymore.
No, I don't. I dug out one of those Bill Monroe DVDs the other day, and I was going to. I was like, oh, where do I put this? Just like It hadn't occurred to me that I just don't have the technology anymore.
You're right. But you know, we did it. We had a really good staff, and Jane again was very organized, and we had lists upon lists of what should, go first, when these things should get transferred and all that stuff. But we managed to do it, get everything. And then before we knew it, I mean, it was literally within a year, we couldn't sell a VHS tape. Nobody wanted one. But we kept putting out new stuff, and we got some, since you're more of a bluegrass oriented show, your listeners are more bluegrass oriented. Bluegrass was always a big part of what we did, with people like Pete Wernick, who was a very important part of our banjo collection of instruction. And he's a natural teacher. We didn't have to tell him how to teach. He just does it. And he did his jamming videos, which are very popular. And another banjo player, Bill Evans, and we got a lot of old time players, Mike Seeger. Actually, my biggest hero and the person who started me in music was Pete Seeger. And Pete agreed to do a video for us, and that was a huge thing for me. And then Tom Bresch, who just passed away recently, was Merle Travis's son. So we got Travis kind of style. Other, fiddle players, some great fiddle players, some bluegrass singers, Daly and Vincent, who are fantastic bluegrass singers, did 2 videos for us. The Nashville Bluegrass Band, we just kept trying to find people who we felt people wanted to learn things from.
Yeah, just like looking through the list today, sort of Ralph Stanley is in there, Mike Marshall, Doc Watson, Bela Fleck. There's such a from all the eras, through to Chris Thiele, and everybody's in there. And some of the lessons have become sort of iconic in their own right. So the parking lot pickers, the solos every parking lot picker should know. The Steve Kaufman series have become sort of. Is
another one. Steve is actually one of our most prolific flat picking instructors. And he's a dynamo of being able to take concepts and make them understandable for people.
And he did some of the Doc Watson lessons, didn't he? So sitting with Doc.
Yeah, it was interesting when I did my second my second video with Doc, we did the first one, which we shot at Merle Fest, his festival that he does in North Carolina. And then I asked Doc if he would do another one for us just on his own, and he said yes. So again, we went down to North Carolina, and he specifically asked for Steve Kaufman to be the guy to back him up, which was surprising because he had been working with Jack Lawrence and, other guitar players, but he wanted Steve. And Steve, maybe he understood that Steve was a real teacher. And Doc, again, was one of those guys, was not a natural teacher, although he certainly did an amazing job putting his talents out for people to understand. But he was such a wonderful, warm-hearted guy. And we got to work with Merle, his son, too, but that, unfortunately, he passed before we could do any video with him. But I went down to Deep Gap, where they live in North Carolina, stayed at their house for several days and recorded Merle doing his guitar stuff, flat picking and slide guitar, finger picking, too. So I got to know Doc and his family that way. And the other thing I should add, because it's part of my life, is what great friends I've made along the way with these people who are they're incredible artists. And I feel like, people like Sam and Tony and Bela and, all these people are friends, as well as people that made instructional videos for us.
Yeah, I interviewed Tony Trischka fairly recently, and I spoke to him just the other day, and he said that you two had got together and done some playing recently.
He played on my new CD, which is I'm just going to start mixing. I've got all the tracks now, and he came up to Woodstock just about maybe a month ago, and actually it was on my birthday in May, and he played on 2 songs that are going to be on my next CD. Which, because I'm not really a bluegrass player myself, but I incorporate some of that into my, so Jay Unger, played some fiddle on a song, and, Bruce Molsky played some banjo, and, I sort of cross over into those areas. I'm more of a folky, a bluesy kind of guy, but I love bluegrass too.
I was going to ask you about that, actually, just sort of looking back across the decades at the catalogue of stuff, like with the idea that, things are looked at as being blues or bluegrass or folk or old time, or was that sort of in the 60s, maybe 70s, was that as clear cut? Did people think of it as being distinct styles, or was it all sort of considered just acoustic music?
Yeah, there was so much crossover. The Nitty Gritty Dirt Band was not a bluegrass band. They didn't come from the hills of North Carolina, but look at the impact they made on the bluegrass world with Will the Circle Be Unbroken? And, I came out of the Pete Seeger, Woody Guthrie, Josh White, Brownie McGee, who was my teacher, blues and folk songs. But I got to hear Bill Monroe at Carnegie Hall, and I got to hear Platt and Scruggs at Carnegie Hall. So they came to New York. Clarence White came with the Kentucky Colonels and played at a little cafe in Greenwich Village. So, bluegrass was always kind of part of the scene, but it wasn't quite as delineated as something other. Maybe now it's a little more fractured. I'm not sure, but there's still a lot of crossover between old time music and bluegrass, and a lot of people play it all. I mean, look at Billy Strings, the new phenomenon of guitar playing, and he plays everything. And I don't think he'd be pigeonholed into saying, I just play bluegrass, because he doesn't. And, you could say that, and mention Chris Thiele and the Punch Brothers and people like that. There's a lot of bluegrass in there, but it's a lot more than that too. So the music world, I think, has expanded, even though there are pockets of like festivals where you still can't bring drums, or electric instruments. There is that. And I think that's good that stays that way too.
Yeah, there's certainly enough breadth of music and festivals, and that's one of the joys of living in such a connected world, is that whatever it is you're into, however niche it is, you can find some people who just like that, but you also can find lots of other, like somebody like me living in England, I can feel connected with through things like Homespun, but also through Facebook or Artist Works or YouTube, or
Sure.
I feel connected to a community of musicians who like the similar kind of music that I like and are learning to play it. And, I feel like we're all learning together, which is great.
Yeah. Yeah. And, there's a long tradition of people in Britain playing bluegrass and American style music. I mean, not to mention rock and roll and rockabilly and all that stuff. In fact, a really good friend of mine who you may know, who's going to be coming over once again to be part of Richard Thompson's Frets and Refrains camp here, is Martin Simpson. Who's, as you know, is just a totally brilliant guitarist, songwriter, singer. And he often incorporates American country and traditional American styles into his music. And he'll play banjo, or he'll play, old Appalachian ballads just as much as he'll play English ballads, or, that kind of thing. And I just love what he does, and I'm looking forward to seeing him here in my area again.
Yeah. And sort of now things have moved on beyond DVD to the world of digital and streaming. Has that sort of made more of the content available to more people? Has that sort of totally opened it up?
I think it does make it. It makes it available mainly because it's so instant. And especially if for instance, if you're in Britain and you order a DVD from us, you're going to have to wait for it to go across the ocean. Or especially if you're in Australia or Japan, where we have people who buy our stuff. Now, wherever you are in the world, it's just a click away. There it is. It's instant. And frankly, we've actually, after I mentioned all the work we did in making all those hundreds and hundreds of VHS into DVDs, now we don't have DVDs anymore. It's all downloadable or streaming. So it's all just online. And in some ways, it makes things very easy for the customer. They don't have something in there. I still like to get CDs, for instance, and hold them in my hand and look at them and, all that stuff. But on the other hand, I rarely put them in a CD player. I just I put them in the computer, or I listen to some streaming service. And it's the same with Homespun. I think people now are used to the idea that, I want to play Norman Blake's song, so I want to learn how to play that. So I'll go to the Homespun site, purchase it, and there it is. Like right there, right that minute, you can do it. So anywhere in the world. So that makes a big difference, I think, to the accessibility of our stuff and everybody else's stuff. We're certainly not the only ones that do that, but we had to make that change along with everybody else.
And so there's literally no physical product at all anymore?
No. Well, some books. We still have some books with audio that you can download. We have some books through Hal Leonard Corporation, which was our distributor for many, many years, 20 some years when we had DVDs. And now they're doing some books with us and that kind of thing. So we're still publishing books with them. In fact, we have probably in the next few months, we're going to have a Homespun songbook, which will be a physical product, but it'll have 100 songs that with guitar chords and notes that I made for each song and how to play them and that kind of thing.
And does the lack of physical product, does that sort of take away a huge logistical headache, or is it just a different logistical headache now?
Oh, well, the main thing for us is that we don't have to have 10 people or 15 people packing and shipping stuff and printing labels and printing covers, and it makes it very much easier for us. And we can put something out in a matter of 2 or 3 weeks after we record it, rather than waiting for pressing plants and buying the boxes and printing the slicks and printing the tablature. Now it's just a PDF, and it just can go out almost. We just have to edit and put it together and send it out to people. So that makes it a very different process for us.
And how much? Curious to know how much of the lessons you've recorded over the years sort of haven't made it through to the sort of digital era, if the stuff that's naturally fallen by the wayside, or is it pretty much all still out there?
Very few. There are a few that we felt didn't. Maybe they were made early enough so that the video quality wasn't good enough, that kind of thing. Or a few audio products that we still have to digitize and maybe get out at some point. But it's very, very few. Almost everything that we ever made is available. So we're proud of that.
And there's so much of it. I subscribe to your daily emails, partly because there's offers and discounts in them, but partly it's just a way of finding out what's in the catalogue, because it's just a different selection of stuff every day, and there's so much in there. It sort of surfaces things that I didn't know existed.
Well, that's the reason we do it, in a way. And my wife, again, Jane, does most of the work on setting those things up every day, figuring out what didn't we do for the last 5 or 6 weeks or months or whatever. What do we need to bring forward? And because it is such a big catalog, and it's no longer a paper catalog that we send out to people, things get lost. So these emailings help. As you say, they're always discounted stuff. And we try to bring to people's attention the things that we think maybe are really worthwhile, but they might not know who this person is. So this brings them to the front page, so to speak. Yeah,
I bought a great, just an audio course, but for sort of swing guitar rhythm the other day that I never would have found if I'd gone looking for it. I don't think it just wouldn't have occurred to me to
Probably Mac Dowling, who's a fabulous player and teacher. One of my favorites, actually. So yeah, he's one of those guys. He's not a household name, so people might just sort of go by and not notice. So if we put him front and center, or that kind of thing is, I think, very useful for people.
Yeah, and we've talked a little bit about some of the sort of specific lessons and the people you work with. I wonder if, and maybe it's sort of impossible over such a span of work, but if there's any people in particular or particular lessons you're most fond of or most proud of, or sort of look back on with a lot of affection.
Oh, there's so many. We have some people that we've only managed to get one video of, but it's great, like Bryan Sutton. I mean, Bryan Sutton's a fantastic musician, all-around guitar player. The country star, Steve Warner, we did a couple of videos with him. That's kind of thrilling. I mentioned Pete Seeger. Dr. John is a big one for us. And that was a thrill to get him both on audio and video. Donald Fagen from Steely Dan did a video for us on his piano ideas. I'd have to be looking at our website myself to bring to mind some of these people. And I mentioned Kelly Joe Phelps, Woody Mann, who also we lost this year. Fantastic guitar player and all around musician, just wonderful player. So a lot of them are based on my personal relationships with people. And, as people like Tony Trischka, always such a treat to work with. Bill Keith, of course, who we lost a few years ago, was a close friend, lived just a mile down the road from us.
And of course, you sort of taught lessons throughout as well, haven't you? You're still teaching now through Homespun.
Yeah, I still do. I mean, I'm sure I have more lessons than anybody else on Homespun. And that was my calling, even when I was in college, before I was a professional musician. I might have been playing for 2 or 3 years before I started teaching. And I took lessons with Brownie McGee, the great blues guitarist, for 2 or 3 years. And when I got married right out of college, and the only way I could think of to make a living, other than the fact that I was an English literature major, which didn't do me much good, in the job market, I started teaching guitar, and then started playing in different groups. But when that fell down, I left a group, for instance, there's a group called the New World Singers in the early 60s that recorded for Atlantic Records and toured around for a while. And when I left that group, I went back to teaching guitar. And I actually continued teaching guitar privately for many years when the gigs were not as plentiful as they could have been. And I still, to this day, do some workshops. Every year I do at least 2 or 3 teaching guitar camps, one with Richard Thompson, one with Jorma Kaukonen, who's a wonderful guy, and I've done his camp for 20-some years. So I still do teach, and I still enjoy it, but I don't have a slew of private lessons anymore. I gave that up a while ago.
And so what's coming up, like both for you and for Homespun? Obviously, you just mentioned you've got a new CD coming out soon.
Right. That's separate from Homespun. That's my other side, my performing and, my solo side, more or less. We're still putting out new stuff. We just put out a new lesson in the last few days with Toby Walker, who's one of our most popular blues fingerpicking teachers. My son, Adam, who's also a big part of I should have mentioned him earlier. He's been our main editor of videos, and he's produced a lot of lessons. He lives in California, so he's on the opposite coast. And he's making a series of lessons on kind of fretboard theory for us, how you get around the fretboard, how you know the notes and the strings and the frets and all that stuff. So that is something we're working on now and should be out in the next couple of months, I would think. So we're not putting them out at the pace we used to, but we're still putting out new stuff. And we have a few friends here in Woodstock that I'm trying to finagle into the studio. We had to stop for a while because people didn't want to get into a closed studio with the COVID thing going on. And, the music, the whole atmosphere has changed so much with the virus. So we're trying to get around that. And we have our own little studio now in our office, and nice lights and cameras and setup. So, and I've been doing my own lessons there. So that, some of them would almost qualify as bluegrass, although I'm not a bluegrass player, but I did a lesson on Will the Circle Be Unbroken, but it's more of a finger-picking style thing, but it's sort of Mother Maybelle Carter style.
You have your own signature guitar now, don't you, from Santa Cruz?
I do. The Santa Cruz Guitar Company, which is a wonderful sort of boutique guitar outfit out in Santa Cruz, California, offered, and I accepted this beautiful signature guitar that I helped design, and they made a whole run of them. They're still selling them in stores as far as I know, but I got mine, and actually my son actually just got one too. So we have twin twin guitars. It's an absolutely stunning instrument. And if anybody's interested in going to the Santa Cruz Guitar Company online on their website, you can see it's called an HT13.
Cool. We'll check it out. I'll put a link in the show notes so people can go and see.
Wonderful instrument. Yeah. So
cool. Well, so we'll put a link to that in the show notes, and obviously I'm going to link to Homespun and maybe some links to some of my favourite lessons over the years that I've enjoyed. Is there anywhere else I can send people for information? Anywhere it'd be useful for me to link to?
Well, aside from Homespun, my personal website, if you're interested in my bio and my where I'm playing, would be just happytraum.com. And I'm sort of gradually adding some video performances there, mostly from YouTube. I think that's probably, my son Adam Traum is doing some beautiful songwriting, and it's Adam Traum. I think it's adamtraumguitar.com. He's a very good player, very good songwriter. I actually miss coming over to the UK. I think when the world calms down a little bit and those little bugs in the air kind of go away, or we get immunity or whatever, I'd love to come back. The last time I was there was, maybe 4 or 5 years ago. I did a show at the Cecil Sharp House in London, which was really, really nice. I had a really good time doing that.
It's a very cool place. It's just a
really nice
sort of one-off place. Yeah. Great. Well, I'm going to stick some links to all of that in the show notes. And I'll also stick a link in. Happy has very kindly given us a discount code that listeners to Bluegrass Jam Along can use to go and get some money off some of these great Homespun lessons. So I'll put all the information for that in the show notes as well.
Great.
But thank you. This has been an absolute treat.
Very nice meeting you. And thanks for doing this. I hope your listeners enjoy it.
Cool. I don't know about you, but I really enjoyed that one. That was, a really fun conversation to get a chance to be part of. So thank you, Happy. Links in the show notes to all the stuff we talked about, and also details of that discount code. Happy set up a code that is just the word Jam Along, and that will get you 20% off everything you want at Homespun for the next few weeks. The code is valid until the 8th of July 2022. Just putting that out there for those of you who will be downloading and listening to this after that date, because I'm sure there'll be plenty more people hearing this in the future. But yes, you've got a few weeks to grab some bargains. I'm going to list some of my favourite lessons in the show notes, but do take advantage of that and get your 20% off. Great. I'll see you next time. Have a good week. Happy picking. Bluegrass Jam Along is proud to be sponsored by Collings Guitars and Mandolins, making some of the finest guitars and mandolins in the world since the 1970s. Visit collingsguitars.com and find out why.